The mist rises from the Hoh River like breath from sleeping lungs. It's October in Olympic National Park, Washington State, and the moss hangs so thick on the Sitka spruce that the forest seems upholstered in green velvet. I can hear the water, always the water, moving over stones that were ancient when my grandparents were born. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I came here to forget. 3 months ago, I resigned from the neuroscience department at UC Berkeley. The official reason was personal leave. The truth was messier. Burnout, a failed marriage, and the growing suspicion that studying memory in a lab had made me forget how to live inside my own. I brought minimal gear, a weatherproof tent, a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, freeze-dried meals, water purification tablets, and my camera. An old Sony mirrorless, the kind that still feels substantial in your hands. I told myself I'd document the wildlife, maybe rediscover why I fell in love with biology in the first place. On the third day, I filmed something that shouldn't exist, and it spoke to me. The first 2 days passed in the rhythm that forests teach you if you're patient enough to learn. Wake with the gray pre-dawn light filtering through nylon. Boil water for coffee that tastes like pine smoke. Walk. I'd chosen a dispersed camping area, 12 miles from the nearest trailhead, accessible only by an unmarked path that rangers use for wildlife surveys. The permit had cost me 2 months of email exchanges and a conversation with a Forest Service biologist who wanted to ensure I understood the risks. No cell service, no emergency beacon, limited human traffic, and black bears actively foraging before winter. I understood. That was the point. My routine was simple. Morning hike, 3 to 5 miles, documenting flora, filming river ecosystems, practicing the kind of observation that academia had trained out of me. Afternoon, camp maintenance, journaling, reading the field guides I'd brought, mammals of the Pacific Northwest, tracking and the art of seeing. Evening, cook, review footage, sleep by 9. The forest revealed itself slowly. Roosevelt elk moving through the understory like ghosts made of muscle and velvet. A Pacific fisher, rare, beautiful, darting between hemlocks. Banana slugs the size of my hand. The calls of varied thrush at dawn, sounding almost electronic in their precision. I documented everything. The scientist in me couldn't help it. On day 2, I noticed the first anomaly. I'd set up a motion-activated trail camera near a game trail, hoping to catch nocturnal visitors. When I checked it at noon, the camera had been moved. Not knocked over by wind or animal, moved. Rotated 90 degrees on its strap, now facing a cedar trunk instead of the trail. The footage showed nothing. Just 18 seconds of darkness, then a blur, then the tree. I adjusted it, marked the position with GPS coordinates on my phone, and told myself it was a bear. Bears are curious. They manipulate objects. That night I heard something circling my camp. Not close, maybe 50 yards out, moving through the dense undergrowth with a rhythm that wasn't quite right. Too bipedal, too deliberate. The steps would come in groups of 4 or 5, then stop. Silence for 30 seconds. Then movement again from a different angle. I lay in my sleeping bag, headlamp within reach, bear spray clipped to the tent wall, and listened. The steps never came closer than 30 yards. At 3:47 a.m., they stopped entirely. I know the time because I was checking my phone every few minutes, some part of me wanting the artificial comfort of glowing numbers and battery percentage indicators. When dawn came, I found the tracks. The first footprint was 17 inches long. I measured it 3 times with a ruler from my first aid kit, then photographed it from multiple angles, placing a dollar bill beside it for scale. The print was in soft mud near the creek, 40 feet from where I'd hung my food bag, 5 toes distinctly visible, a pronounced arch, weight distribution that suggested bipedal locomotion, heel strike, roll through midfoot, push off from the ball and toes. Not a bear, not human either. The proportions were wrong. I'd studied enough comparative anatomy to know what I was looking at, and enough scientific skepticism to doubt it anyway. There were 6 more prints forming an interrupted trail toward the river. Then nothing. The creature had either stepped onto rocks or vanished into the water. I spent 2 hours documenting the site. Soil composition: loamy, slightly acidic, typical for temperate rainforest. Depth of impression: approximately 2 inches, suggesting significant weight, 250 to 400 pounds, if my calculations were right. Gait pattern: stride length of 53 inches. The scientist in me was ecstatic. The primate in me was terrified. I returned to camp and reviewed my trail camera footage again. Frame by frame, I scanned for anything I'd missed. At timestamp 02:14:33, there was a single frame, 1/24th of a second, where something large and dark moved through the left side of the image. I froze the frame, enhanced it digitally, adjusted brightness and contrast. A shape, humanoid, covered in dark hair, moving with fluid, economical grace. Gone in the next frame. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the screen, feeling my understanding of reality perform small, uncomfortable adjustments. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I would try to find it again. Not to capture it, not to prove anything to the world, but to understand, to see clearly, just once, something that existed outside the frameworks I'd built my entire career around. I packed light, camera, water, bear spray, GPS, emergency whistle, basic first aid, left a note in my tent with my coordinates and intentions, the way you're supposed to when you're doing something potentially stupid in the wilderness. The tracks led upriver, into terrain that grew steadily more difficult. Downed logs slick with moss, creek crossings where the water ran fast and cold over stones, hillsides steep enough that I had to use roots and branches as handholds. 3 hours in, I found the second sign, a cedar branch, freshly broken, hanging at exactly my eye level. Beneath it, arranged on a flat stone, 3 river rocks, each about the size of a fist, placed in a perfect line. Not natural, not random, a message, or a warning. I found it at 4:37 p.m. in a clearing where an old-growth Douglas fir had fallen decades ago, creating a cathedral of light in the otherwise dense canopy. It was sitting, not crouching, not hunched, sitting, with its back against the massive root ball, legs extended, hands resting on its thighs, like a person taking a break on a difficult hike. The posture was so casually human that my brain struggled to reconcile it with what I was seeing. 8 feet tall, even seated, covered in dark brown hair that looked coarse and thick, with gray patches around the face and shoulders. The face itself, I still see it when I close my eyes, was not an ape's face. The brow ridge was pronounced, yes, but the eyes were forward-facing, intelligent, deeply set under that ridge. The nose was broad and flat. The mouth, slightly open, showed teeth that looked disturbingly human in their arrangement. It was breathing. I could see its chest rising and falling, and it was looking directly at me. I froze, every instinct screaming contradictory commands. Run, hide, stay still, make noise, be silent. My hand, moving on its own, raised the camera. I pressed record. The creature didn't move. We stared at each other across 30 feet of forest floor carpeted in ferns and fallen needles. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time became strange, elastic, long enough for me to notice details. The way its hands were proportioned like mine, just larger. The intelligence in its eyes, not animal cunning but something closer to contemplation. The scar tissue on its left shoulder, pale against the dark hair. It had been injured, recently. My fear began to transmute into something else. Not quite empathy, the creature was too alien for that, but recognition. I was looking at something that hurt, that rested, that sat in afternoon light filtering through ancient trees. That thought. Slowly, carefully, I lowered myself to sitting position, mirroring its posture, a gesture of non-aggression that felt more right than raising my hands or backing away. The creature tilted its head slightly, studying me. Then it stood. The movement was fluid, economical, entirely without the awkwardness you'd expect from something that size. It rose to its full height, I estimate 9 feet, maybe more, and took one step toward me. I should have run. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to run. I didn't. It took another step, then another, closing the distance between us with deliberate slowness, giving me time to flee if I chose to. I stayed. When it was 10 feet away, it stopped, looked down at me. Then its gaze shifted to the camera in my hands, still recording. It raised one hand. The gesture was so human it hurt. Index finger extended, pointing at the lens. Then it spoke. The voice was deep, resonant, with harmonics that seemed to come from somewhere other than vocal cords. Not words exactly, but meaning, transmitted in a way my brain interpreted as language. You'll forget this day. 4 words, pronounced with perfect clarity in English. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, moving between the trees with impossible silence, and was gone. I don't remember hiking back to camp. I know I must have. I know it took hours because it was dark when I arrived. My headlamp battery nearly dead, legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. But I have no memory of the return journey. Nothing. The footage was there. I sat in my tent with the camera balanced on my knee, playing and replaying those 7 minutes and 43 seconds. Everything was there. The clearing, the creature sitting, then standing, then approaching. The moment it pointed at the camera. But no audio. Just the ambient sound of wind in the trees and my own breathing, rapid and shallow. The creature's voice, if it had spoken at all, hadn't been recorded. I spent the entire night reviewing the footage, taking screenshots, making notes in my field journal with handwriting that deteriorated from precise scientific notation to barely legible scrawls. 2347, reviewed footage, 6th time. Creature's mouth doesn't move during alleged speech. Possible auditory hallucination, stress response, or communication method beyond standard vocalization. Ear 1, 10:15. Can't sleep. Keep feeling like I'm forgetting something important. What did it say? I wrote it down immediately. I know I wrote it down. 03:30. Found the note I wrote. You'll forget this day. But the memory feels slippery, like trying to hold water. 04:12. Neuroscience perspective. Memory consolidation requires protein synthesis, synaptic changes. What if there was some kind of infrasound? Frequencies below 20 Hz can affect brain function, induce anxiety, disrupt cognition, could explain the memory difficulty. 05:45. But that doesn't explain how I understood it. In English. Perfect English. By dawn, I'd reached a decision point that every scientist dreads and craves in equal measure. I had evidence of something extraordinary. Video footage, clear and unambiguous, showing a creature that mainstream science says doesn't exist. The responsible action, the career-defining action, would be to hike out immediately, present the footage to colleagues, organize a proper research expedition. But something stopped me. That scar on its shoulder, the way it had sat resting before I arrived, the deliberate slowness of its approach, giving me every opportunity to flee, and those words, already growing hazy in my memory despite my notes. You'll forget this day. Not a threat, not a warning, a prediction, or a gift. I thought about my last 5 years in academia, the constant pressure to publish, to secure funding, to prove significance, the way every discovery became currency, every observation a data point to be extracted and commodified, the slow death of wonder under the weight of metrics and impact factors. I thought about what would happen if I released this footage. Media circus, cryptozoologists, trophy hunters, reality TV shows, this forest, this cathedral of silence, invaded by every person with a camera phone and a YouTube channel. The creature would be hunted, or worse, found. By noon, I'd made my choice. The one that would cost me my credibility if anyone ever knew. The one that felt for the first time in years like actual integrity. I would document everything in my private journals. I would keep the footage as personal record. And I would tell no one. Some discoveries, I realized, aren't meant to be shared. Some knowledge carries the responsibility of silence. But first I needed to understand why my memory was failing. On day 5 I found the den. I wasn't looking for it. I was checking my trail cameras one last time before packing up to leave, hiking the network of game trails I'd identified that first week. The camera on the North Ridge had triggered 63 times overnight, unusual enough to investigate. The footage showed the same creature moving past the camera multiple times, always carrying something. Branches, moss, what looked like strips of bark. Building. I followed the direction it had been traveling, moving slowly, stopping every few minutes to listen. The forest was quieter here, deeper in, old growth that had somehow escaped logging, with trees that predated European contact with North America. The den entrance was hidden behind a curtain of salal and ferns, tucked into a rock overhang that created a natural shelter. I wouldn't have noticed it except for one detail. The smell, not unpleasant. Earthy, musky, with notes of cedar and something else, medicinal, almost antiseptic, and beneath it the smell of infection. I approached carefully, making noise, letting my presence be known. No response. I called out, feeling ridiculous and necessary at the same time. Hello? I don't mean any harm, I just want to help. Silence. I moved the ferns aside and looked in. The creature was there, lying on its side on a bed of moss and cedar boughs. The wound on its shoulder was worse than I'd thought. A deep laceration, inflamed and seeping. In the dim light, I could see it had tried to treat itself. Crushed leaves plastered to the wound, strips of bark used as makeshift bandaging. But it wasn't enough. The infection had spread, creating angry red streaks on the skin beneath the hair. Its eyes were open, watching me. "Jesus," I whispered. "How long have you been like this?" I set down my pack slowly, hands visible, and pulled out my first aid kit. Inadequate for this, but better than nothing. Antibiotic ointment, gauze, medical tape, ibuprofen for the inflammation and fever I could see in its labored breathing. "I'm going to help you," I said, "if you'll let me." The creature made a sound, low, rumbling, somewhere between a growl and a sigh. Then it shifted, exposing the wound more fully. Permission. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning and treating the wound as best I could with my limited supplies. The creature remained still, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded like pain or relief. Its skin was warm, fever hot, and the muscle tissue beneath was dense, unlike anything I'd encountered. As I worked, I talked, partly to calm myself, partly because it seemed important to maintain some kind of communication. "I'm not going to tell anyone about you," I said, applying antibiotic cream to the cleaned wound. "I know that probably doesn't mean anything to you. Maybe you already know. Maybe that's why you said what you said." The creature's eyes, dark brown, almost black, tracked my movements. "You were right, though. I am forgetting. Little details, slipping away even when I try to hold on to them. I don't know if that's you or me or just how this works, how the mind protects itself from things it can't process." I secured the gauze with medical tape, knowing it wouldn't last long but hoping it might help. "There. That's the best I can do with what I have. You need antibiotics. Real ones. But I can't." My voice caught. "I can't bring anyone else here." The creature reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed one massive hand on my forearm. The touch was gentle. I stayed for 3 more days. This wasn't the plan. I was supposed to hike out on day 6, return to civilization, figure out what came next in my meticulously disrupted life. Instead, I set up camp within sight of the den and became something between a nurse and a guardian. Each morning I checked the wound, changed the dressing, rationed my antibiotic supplies with the careful precision of someone who knows there won't be more, brought water in my collapsible container, left food, freeze-dried camping meals that the creature regarded with what I interpreted as polite confusion before occasionally eating. The fever broke on day 7. On day 8, I found it standing outside the den, testing the injured shoulder with careful movements. When it saw me, it made a sound, softer than before, almost conversational. I was learning its language, or it was learning to communicate with me in ways I could understand. Hard to say which. That afternoon, while I was filtering water from a nearby creek, my emergency beacon activated. I'd forgotten I'd set it to auto check-in mode, a safety feature that pinged my emergency contact if I didn't manually reset it every 5 days. My sister, Janet, who I'd listed as next of kin, who worked as a search and rescue coordinator in Oregon. My stomach dropped when I saw the notification on the device. Alert transmitted. Response team notified. I had maybe 24 hours before a helicopter arrived. The creature seemed to know something had changed. When I returned to camp, it was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking west, the direction rescue would come from. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean... There's going to be people, searchers. They'll think something happened to me." It tilted its head, listening. "I have to meet them before they get here, away from this place. I'll lead them away, tell them I got lost, had equipment failure. They can't find you." The creature reached down and picked up a stone from the ground, held it for a moment, then placed it carefully on a flat rock nearby, then another stone, then a third, the same pattern I'd found days ago, a message I still didn't fully understand. It looked at me with those impossibly deep eyes and spoke again. This time I heard it clearly. Not words in English, but meaning transmitted directly into understanding. "You carry 2 burdens, the weight of knowing and the weight of silence. Both will fade. This is gift, not curse." "I don't want to forget," I said, and realized I was crying. "This matters. You matter." The creature stepped forward and placed both hands on my shoulders, gently, the way you might steady a child. The touch was warm through my jacket. Memory is story we tell ourselves. Story changes each telling. You will remember what you need. The rest will become dream. Then it turned and moved back toward the den, pausing once to look back at me. I understood. This was goodbye. The rescue team arrived at 11:47 a.m. the next morning. A helicopter, 2 search and rescue personnel, and my sister Janet, who'd flown up from Portland the moment she got the alert. I met them 3 miles from my actual campsite, at the coordinates I'd transmitted once I'd hiked far enough away. I'd broken down my camp, packed everything, and positioned myself at a location that suggested I'd been attempting to hike out when I'd gotten disoriented. The story I told was simple. Equipment failure, lost phone signal, minor injury to my ankle that made me decide to stay put. All plausible, all lies. Janet hugged me hard enough to bruise. Jesus, Sarah, 5 days overdue. Do you know what that does to people? I'm sorry, I said, and I was, for worrying her, for the lie, for all of it. The SAR coordinator, a weathered woman named Torres, checked my ankle, my hydration, my mental state. You seem remarkably calm for someone who's been lost for almost 2 weeks. I wasn't lost, I said carefully. I knew exactly where I was. I just couldn't get out easily with the ankle. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Well, you're safe now. Let's get you home. As they loaded my gear into the helicopter, I looked back toward the interior forest, the direction I'd come from, the place I'd left behind. Nothing moved in the shadows between the trees, but I felt watched, felt the weight of unseen eyes, and something that might have been gratitude or farewell. The helicopter lifted, rotors churning the autumn air into turbulence and noise. Below, the forest became abstract, a carpet of green broken by rivers like silver threads. I thought about the footage still on my camera, packed carefully in my bag. I thought about the journal entries becoming less detailed each day as my memory began its slow, gentle dissolution. I thought about the creature, recovering in its den, safe for now because I'd chosen silence over proof. Janet sat beside me, holding my hand. You okay? Yeah, I said. I think I am. You're different, she observed. Calmer, like you found whatever you went looking for. Maybe, I said. The truth was stranger and simpler. I'd found something I wasn't looking for and chosen not to keep it, chosen to let it remain wild, unknown, protected by the same obscurity that had preserved it for millennia. Some discoveries, I'd learned, aren't meant to advance human knowledge. Some discoveries are meant to teach us the value of what we don't know. 6 months later, I'm teaching again, not at Berkeley, but at a small community college in Bellingham, Washington. Introduction to Biology. Environmental Science. Class is small enough that I learn every student's name. I live in a cabin 40 minutes from campus, close enough to the forest that I can smell the cedar on wet mornings. The footage is still on my camera. I watch it sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come. It's different each time. Not the images themselves, but my memory of the experience. Details shift, rearrange, take on dream logic qualities. Was the creature really 9 feet tall, or has my mind exaggerated it? Did it actually speak, or did I imagine language in the rumbling of its voice? I've stopped trying to preserve the memory with perfect fidelity. Instead, I write what I remember, knowing it will change in the retelling, knowing that's okay. My journal from those days is strange to read. The handwriting deteriorates. Whole passages become illegible toward the end. I remember writing them, but I can't remember what I was trying to say. The last entry, dated the morning of my rescue, is a single sentence in handwriting that looks like mine, but feels foreign. Some things are real precisely because they're impossible to prove. I don't remember writing it, but I believe it's true. Last month I returned to Olympic National Park. Different trail, different season, spring instead of fall. I told myself I was just hiking, reconnecting with the landscape. But I checked the game trails, looked for signs, listened to the forest with the attention I'd learned that October. Nothing. Or everything. Depends how you look at it. On the 3rd day, I found 3 stones arranged in a line on a flat rock near a creek. Probably coincidence. Probably just stones that happened to fall that way. But I sat beside them for an hour and felt something I can only describe as peace. My students sometimes ask me why I left research science for teaching. I tell them the official story: burnout, wanting to focus on education, desire for work-life balance. The real answer is harder to articulate. I left because I learned that not everything worth knowing needs to be proven, that wonder and rigor can coexist, that the most profound scientific observation is sometimes knowing when to look away. And because I was given a gift, the slow, merciful forgetting of something too large for one person to carry. I still have dreams. In them, I'm sitting in a clearing with something that shouldn't exist, and we're both just breathing, both just existing in the same space. There are no words, no proof, no need for either. In the dream, I'm not afraid. When I wake, the details fade like mist off the river, but the feeling remains, that I witnessed something true, something that chose to remain hidden, and that choosing silence was the only way to honor it. There are still places where the world resists in silence, where knowing means learning what not to say, where the line between memory and dream becomes thin enough to slip through. And maybe the real discovery isn't what we find, but what we're wise enough to leave behind.